It all starts in Houston. Young George and his family move into a real fixer-upper, no lights, no power, nothing. One night, his mom has to split a single burger 4 ways just to keep the kids fed. George is starving and ready to dive in, but his sister Mary insists on saying grace first. George waits, but the second the prayer hits amen, he wolfs his portion down.
I'm so hungry. I could eat this table.
Mary sees he is still hungry and hands over her half of the burger. Later that night, his mom lays it on the line. He has got to stop failing classes or he'll never catch up. She begs him, "George, please, just stop fighting at school." Next day at school, things are rough because George is wearing literal rags. In class, he raises his hand to answer a question, but the teacher ignores him because of his dirty clothes. Instead, she calls on a kid with shiny shoes. At lunch, George sits alone with an empty plate. A bully starts clowning him for not even being able to afford a slice of bread. The kid keeps pushing and pushing.
You want it? Go get it. George should change his name from Foreman to Poor Man.
George snaps, levels the kid with one punch, and bails before the teacher can grab him. For George, anger is his only language. Fighting is the only thing he is actually good at. Fast forward a few years. George and a buddy are loitering outside a bar when a drunk guy stumbles out. They decide to tail him for a quick mugging, but they pick the wrong target. He is an undercover cop.
Surprise, boys!
The trap is set, police swarm the area, and the chase is on. George manages to lose them by crawling under a house. K9 units are sniffing everywhere, and George has to hide in literal sewage to keep the dogs off his scent. On his way home, George spots a television in a shop window showing an ad for the Job Corps. They're promising free food, a place to stay, and trade skills for high school dropouts. They even pay you to learn. George is hyped and tells his mom he is joining up. She is all for it, telling him he has got way more potential than he realizes. A few days later, George touches down at the Job Corps in California. Security gives him the rules of the house at the gate. Once inside, he immediately butts heads with a guy named Desmond over a bed. While unpacking, George finds a brand new pair of Converse and a note from his mom. Desmond is watching him like a hawk, pure jealousy. In electrical class, George is struggling, and when the other kids laugh, he just gives them that "don't test me" stare. The next day, Desmond is blasting music while George is trying to study. George reaches over and yanks the plug, and surprisingly, they actually start talking and hit it off.
I'm here because I've got unrealized potential.
You got more inside than what you're showing.
Desmond invites him to the mess hall. George goes to grab his new kicks, but they're gone. At lunch, Desmond tells him to eat first, report it later. But while he is eating, George spots a guy across the room wearing his stolen shoes. George gives him the death stare. The guy bolts and locks himself in a dorm room. George kicks the door down and is about to toss the thief out a window when Doc steps in to break it up. Outside, George tries to explain that those shoes were everything to him and his mom. Doc gives him 2 choices, jail or a bus ticket home. Doc pulls out the cash to ship him out of the program. George breaks down and begs for one more shot.
I can't go home, Mr. Broadus. Please.
Doc sees something in him and decides to gamble. He asks if George has ever boxed. George says, only in the streets. Doc tells him boxing is a sport with rules, but he sees that raw power and tells George to join the boxing club. George is all in. Next day at the gym, Doc introduces George to his sparring partner. The bell rings and George starts swinging for the fences, but he has got zero technique. He gets dropped fast, and the crowd starts laughing. Feeling humiliated, George marches over to a heavy bag and punches it so hard it rips off the chain. The whole gym goes silent. In the locker room, Doc calms him down, explaining his opponent had a 6-month head start. He promises George that with training, he'll be on that same level. Doc puts George through the ringer, teaching him the science of the sweet science. Later, George gets a rematch with the guy who dropped him. This time, George knocks him out in seconds. George visits Doc's office and finds out Doc was a pro back in the day. George shows him a magazine featuring Joe Frazier and declares he is going to be the world champion. Doc likes the ambition, but tells him to keep his feet on the ground. The road to the pros is a long one. A year later, 19-year-old George is in the Olympics facing a seasoned Soviet fighter. The commentators aren't giving him a prayer, but his family is glued to the television back home. The whole Job Corps is cheering him on. George lands a series of massive bombs and secures the gold medal. He celebrates by waving a small American flag in pure joy. The day after his big win, George is walking through his neighborhood with his gold medal. He runs into an old friend who trashes him for waving the flag. The guy brings up other black athletes protesting on the podium and accuses George of turning his back on the struggle.
I don't see how you could hold that American flag all up high like you do.
Feeling down, George vents to his mom. She holds him down and gives him that motherly encouragement. George vowing right then to win the heavyweight belt and earn everyone's respect. At the airport, George spots a beautiful girl reading a sports magazine with him on the cover. He shoots his shot, and they start vibing. Her name is Paula. She has to catch her flight, but she scribbles her number down for him. Back at the gym, Doc introduces the new team, promoter Dick Sadler and legend Archie Moore. George starts his tear through the heavyweight division, knocking guys out left and right. He is officially on a collision course with Joe Frazier. Meanwhile, he finally calls Paula, and they start dating. She is ringside for every fight as he climbs to 22-0. Eventually, George and Paula tie the knot after win number 36. His team says it is time for the title. The Sunshine Showdown goes down in Jamaica. Nobody thinks George can take Frazier. In round 1, Frazier lands a heavy hook, but George answers with brutal body shots. George dominates the following rounds, knocking Frazier down over and over until the ref waves it off. George Foreman is the new heavyweight champion of the world. At the after party, George is the man of the hour. A beautiful woman catches his eye. Later, George heads back to his hotel room and finds her waiting in his bed. He gives in to temptation, realizing afterward that he has betrayed his wife. Months later, George is throwing a massive party at his mansion. Things are cold between him and Paula. His sister Mary announces she is pregnant. Meanwhile, Paula answers the phone only to find one of George's mistresses on the other end. She calls him out, and George can't even look her in the eye.
Just like I thought.
George heads to Zaire for the rumble in the jungle against Muhammad Ali. The crowd is chanting Ali Bomai because Ali is the local hero. George takes control early, landing heavy shots while Ali plays it cool. Ali's trash talk gets under George's skin, making him swing even harder out of pure rage. George spends the whole fight headhunting and pinning Ali to the ropes. But by the 8th round, George is gassed. Ali strikes, knocking George to the canvas. It is George's first loss. After the loss, George spirals. He calls his wife, promising to change, but Paula has had enough and tells him to sign the divorce papers.
My lawyer said you haven't signed the papers yet.
I told you I'd get to it.
George visits his mom and admits he fired his whole team, blaming them for the loss. His mom stays supportive, to prove he is still the big bad George. He decides to fight 5 guys in one day. Doc thinks it is a circus act and tells him to stop. During the event, Ali joins the commentary team and steals the spotlight. George challenges Ali to a rematch right there. Despite the chaos, George mows through all 5 fighters. After the fights, George gets news that his pregnant sister Mary is in critical condition. George goes outside and prays, asking God why he is taking the baby. He begs God, "If you need a life, take mine instead." The next morning, it is a miracle. Mary walks out with a healthy baby boy named George Jr. Later, George struggles in a fight against Jimmy Young and loses a decision. In the locker room, his coach lays into him for blowing the Ali rematch. Exhausted and suffering from heatstroke, George collapses. They think he is gone, but George has a spiritual awakening and comes back to life. Days later, he gets baptized. He stands up in a small church, nervously telling the congregation how he found God. He announces he is quitting boxing to become a preacher.
You a fighter?
I'm not a fighter. Not anymore.
George goes to visit Muhammad Ali. Ali is still cracking jokes, but George gets real with him. He admits he used to want to kill Ali out of hate, but now he is there to ask for forgiveness. They have a heart-to-heart, squash the beef, and become lifelong friends. George visits his ex-wife and kids to apologize for the past.
How sorry I am for the way that I treated you. It wasn't right.
A woman named Mary starts talking to him. She finds it hard to believe a bruiser like him is now a man of the cloth. George takes the mic, goes outside the church, and starts preaching to whoever will listen. People mock him, but he stays calm. Mary watches from afar, moved by his sincerity. They hit it off, and George shows her an old, abandoned church he dreams of buying for his own congregation. 7 years later, the dream is real. George is preaching in his own church with Mary and the kids by his side. After a service, a woman asks George to train her grandson who is headed down a dark path. George says no, telling them to look to the Bible instead.
Yeah. The young man, you read the Bible?
A week later, George sees on the news that the boy was arrested for a violent crime. He is devastated that he didn't help when he could. George finds an old building and buys it, turning it into a youth center and gym. He even names a room after Muhammad Ali. But a year later, the lights go out in the middle of a class. The power company says the bills haven't been paid. George hits the bank and finds out his old pal Desmond gambled all the money on bad stocks. The accounts are bone dry. The bank is moving to foreclose on everything, including his mom's house. George goes on a rampage looking for Desmond. Even though he is fuming, his mom tells him he has to forgive him. George finds Desmond in a bar, corners him, and almost loses control. Realizing he is slipping back into his old ways, he stops and forgives him. To save the center, George starts doing commercials and selling grills. But Mary tells him the hustle isn't bringing in enough to stop the bank. As they start hauling his stuff away, George hits a low point. He dusts off his old gloves, thinking about a comeback. Mary is scared he'll become that angry man again, George tells her. I only know two things, hitting people and preaching don't pay the bills. George tracks down Doc and asks him to train him one more time. Doc is hesitant, remembering how hurt he was when George walked away, but eventually Doc says yes, to get back in shape. George starts training with his son. After months of grinding, he finally hits his fighting weight. Before the comeback fight, Doc tells him he needs to find that old anger to win. George refuses, insisting he can win without the hate. Walking to the ring, George tells Doc he is actually nervous to take off his robe in front of the crowd. In the fight, George is almost too calm, taking hits and keeping his cool. By round 2, he finds his groove and starts dismantling his opponent. Seeing the guy can't defend himself, George actually asks the ref to stop the fight. The Foreman comeback is officially the biggest story in sports. After an incredible 24-win streak, a 42-year-old George faces the champ, Evander Holyfield. George fights his heart out but loses the decision. When he goes to the bank afterward, the staff gives him a standing ovation. Even though he lost the belt, he secured a $12 million payday from HBO. He tells Mary, the mission isn't over yet. 3 years later, Michael Moorer beats Holyfield for the title, and George gets the shot. At 45 years old, nobody gives him a chance against a 26-year-old Moorer. Moorer dominates the early rounds, and George is just hanging on. After the 9th, his corner tells him to call it quits. But in the 10th round, George lands a perfect, devastating right hand that puts Moorer down for the count. Against all odds, George Foreman is the heavyweight champion again. The film ends by showing that George took back his title 20 years after losing it. He and Muhammad Ali stayed best friends, talking almost every day until Ali passed. In 1998, Doc Broadus was inducted into the Hall of Fame. Today, George is still preaching in Houston and running his youth center.